Does slavery still exist? If it does, what can we do about it, and how severe is the problem? And what are the solutions? These are some of the important questions we're going to talk about today. Hey, everybody, welcome to the Freedom Lovers Show. I'm your host, David James Rodriguez, and we are building the voluntary world one relationship at a time. And I'm very excited about our guest today because we're talking about a super important topic that few people have the courage and the intellect to speak about. But that's what this show is about, because we want to bring some of the truth to you and some of the solutions. And that's who what we're going to talk about today. And who I brought on the show is Mr. Cory Endurlat, author and founder of the End of Slavery Summit. Very amazing summit that's happening right now, December 2022. So we're going to learn all about the summit, his book, which is titled Slavery Gone for Good. Slavery Still Exists, and you are allowing it. So what can we do about that? Very excited that you're here today. And before we learn about your summit and the book, maybe you can share with the audience who might not know who you are, a little bit about who you are, and
Sure.
how you came to write a book and do a summit, and some of the cool things that you're doing right now in the world.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I'm so glad to have met you. We ran into each other through the online interwebs. And the minute I heard you speak to me, it's like I can feel that energy, and I was like, this is great. I knew you had that passion. I interviewed you for the summit. You're one of the featured speakers, and you were just listing source after source and going at it. And I loved that energy. I told somebody else in an interview I did 2 days ago, like, you're one of the favorite talks that I did because of that.
Thanks,
and because I met you and I was like, man, this guy's involved with all these projects. He's doing all this great stuff. And, myself included, I'm also trying to do all these different projects. We're both trying our best in the pursuit toward freedom, which, you can say is the pursuit of happiness as well, because freedom is ultimately what allows us to be creative, what allows us to imagine a new reality, to see that it's potential that we can live a voluntary world, where we can trade with one another, we can exchange, we have many different modes of solutions and commerce. And I think that's the beauty of it, right? It's an art, and it's not something that you or I can wholly discuss, but it's something that we can look forward to and encourage the audience and everybody out there to create with us, because we know that what we're doing is right. And therefore, the ends will take care of itself, as it says on the Voluntaryist website. If you go to voluntaryist.com, people are like, what is a voluntarist? You use that term, I use that term, and we say, we want a voluntary world. There's a quote up there. It says, hey, if you take care of the means, the ends will take care of itself. But it's true, if you can understand like what's right to do. And most people generally know, yeah, you shouldn't commit violence. Yeah, you shouldn't enslave another. Yeah, but back then, people were enslaving each other, and it was outright, and it was right there in front of their faces, but they did not see their fellow man as equal. So we have to ask ourselves, like, how come that went on for thousands of years? What got people in that mentality? What kept them in that mentality? What kept the people who were enslaved? And how did they attain their freedom from that enslavement? Because that is all going to teach us about today and our enslavement, because slavery is not just something limited, like you said when I interviewed you. It's not just about chains and being, something like chattel slavery. Chattel slavery is just one form. I talk about mental and physical slavery, to break down all forms of slavery into two particular forms. And, because you can look at economics, you can look at political slavery, as Lysander Spooner said in his document, No Treason, the Constitution of No Authority. And he also said multiple other times throughout other works of his, talking about the Civil War and how it was actually a fraud. They're designed to keep people enslaved in other forms of slavery. And to anybody who's new to this information, it's like, what am I talking about? This is shocking. This is crazy. If you don't know who these individuals are, I recommend checking out their work. But these are people who lived in that time period, which wasn't so long after the American Revolution, by the way. And there were probably some veterans still alive at the time, I'm sure. But the thing is that you had so much going on at the time. You see that the beginning of a lot of philosophies in the 1800s. You see, Abraham Lincoln signing documents after the Civil War that nobody knows about, changing the definitions of words, and it turned into the birth certificate scam that we have nowadays. And then we had the income tax, introduced thereafter. And we have all these weird events happening after the Civil War that a lot tends to go back to the 1800s. And while we may want to look at the founding fathers of the 1700s, the 1800s also has a lot to learn from. So the point of the book is not really to give a historical perspective as much, but to give an insight into yourself. You are the source, because you can look into the world around you. You can see what is done, what injustice is done. And most of us have a conscience. Most of us have the ability to choose right action over wrong action. It's just a matter of understanding that and seeing the hypocrisy of those who proclaim to be authority and have an exemption to that morality that you and I have. So you and I see that violence is wrong, and yet, we see somebody with a uniform as someone with a badge or a special position or title exempt from that same morality that you and I have. And they're seen by everybody as moral for doing something completely immoral. So it's very, very strange. And, Lysander Spooner also wrote about this in his book, Vices Are Not Crimes. Talking about how, a lot of vices today, whether it's drinking or gambling, these are individual choices, personal choices. And he's like, wow, I mean, everybody's got a vice of some kind, something that they need to be responsible for themselves, but they're not harming another individual. They're not creating a victim. And that is what differentiates a vice versus a crime. But in our legal system today, I mean, we recognize vices as crimes. And so we'll jail people for owning some plants that they grew for themselves without harming anybody. And maybe they did it because it's actually medicine. And we see even with raw milk and raw animal products, these farmers are being attacked around the country. We see farmland being taken over. And these are all just examples of slavery. I did a whole interview with Crypt Rick where I went over 5 main reasons why we're still enslaved. And I go deep into all the different aspects as to why we are. I've done several interviews talking about this subject before, but frankly, it's really simple. And slavery is something that we understand now as a general populace, which is pretty amazing. The fact that no one's even going to try to attempt to enslave another. And yes, there's still parts of the world that still engage in chattel slavery, but generally we don't try that because we were like, that's just absurd. Why would we do that? And I think that's the point in time where we're going to come to understand this form of slavery, where there's going to be some point in the future where people look back and say, well, why were these people following these strangers and these people they don't know? Why were they giving them these titles and believing they have more rights than other people? I mean, once you really break it down, it's like, wow, this is kind of absurd. It's nonsense. We are equal. We are just human beings. Like, we all have the same capacity. And if we don't, we should encourage each other. We should share our knowledge. We don't impose our will on them and back it by violence, right? So that's what slavery is. It's imposing your will on another and basically coercing someone against their will to do something for your own benefit. As Frederick Douglass would say, he was basically put on the plantation, severe toil for the benefit of another person, and even if the slave master gave him some benefit so that the slave remains as a slave, he still realized he was a slave. And that actually made it worse. The fact that he had the illusion of freedom or the illusion of choice. And that's what the book, The End of All Evil by Jeremy Locke also gets into. It says democracy is the perfect form of evil because everyone gets to be the masters of slaves and the slaves of masters. Whereas communism and these other forms are more overt. You can see them as for what they are. So it makes it less illusory, less fooling. And so that's why we've experimented with so many different forms of government and ideologies, and everybody's thinking, oh, well, this form is better, this form is better, when really, when we look at statism and the underlying beliefs, the mental slavery behind physical slavery, we can see the foundation to all of it.
Absolutely. One of the quotes from your book was from Frederick Douglass, right? And so this is a man, courageous man who was an actual physical slave, and he learned to read and think his way out of it. And his great quote that I took from your book, one of them was, I prayed to be free from slavery for 20 years, but it didn't work until I started praying with my legs. And so for me, dealing with like the school system, right, I see the school system as a form of day prison and also a form of day slavery, because you're forced to do work against your will under threat of coercion. So one of the great conversations you and I had was about this whole thing about slavery, calling it what it is. If it's the authority of the state to take your time, energy, and money against your desires, your free will, that's a form of slavery. So very important that people understand this. And then once you're able to see the state or statism as slavery, you're able to see it in other places as well. So there was another quote that I saw just the other day. It's like, oh, all these things coming up. It's from Dostoevsky. He says the best way to keep a prisoner from escaping is to make sure he never knows he's in a prison. So call it a prison, call it a slave camp, whatever it is. And I think you're right. I think the future is going to be that time where people are like, man, I can't believe these, I call us kings and queens. You are royalty. I am royalty. We are the sons and daughters of God or nature. Something very significant is happening inside of us on this earth, in this reality. And the hyper wealthy parapsychopaths who have had money for so many generations, they have time to pontificate and to think and contemplate and imagine these things. But when we're out here slaving away for a few dollars, we're in this kind of fight or flight emotional set. And it's like, right. Okay, imagine that we're abundant. Now what can we do? Now we can actually pursue the higher calling of this reality. And I think it is full expression of love and joy and gratitude and peace and harmony and some of these really high vibrational things, enlightenment, consciousness. I started learning about the Gateway program and Robert Monroe and like out-of-body experiences. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's so amazing. But like, before I can pursue some of these things, I want to like get out of the system now. And right. So let's talk about this summit that you got going on, because sure. I was so honored you invited me to be a guest there, and you have a lot of other freedom visionaries like Larkin Rose, Mark Passio, David Icke, Dana Martin, and I think, over 40 people, Derek Bros, and a lot of people who I respect, some of my friends, and some people I never heard about before. So I think the power of this summit is that to see, over 40 people who are saying a similar message of freedom, self-ownership, non-aggression in their own way. Everybody comes to this truth in their own way. And I love that you brought up Spooner and the versus vices versus crimes. Hey, somebody eating a mushroom or cannabis or smoking something, that doesn't hurt anybody. So the truth is that we're all allowed to do whatever we want as long as we don't harm anybody or make threats against anybody. Of course, we got to uphold our contracts as well. So the summit, you've been working on it for a few months. It's a lot of effort you're putting forth. So why don't you share with the audience, what is your intention with the summit and kind of what inspired you to do it, and any other thoughts you have about this great project you put together?
Yeah, well, there's more great projects to come as well. I will tell you that. There's a lot more to come. In fact, this is sort of just the introductory project, and I'm glad to see there's hundreds of people signing up last minute, but like I've been promoting over the last 2 months. And then before that, over 6 months of getting this together, the speakers and the different interviews, over 50, technically. So about 50 interviews in about 6 months, not bad, especially as somebody who I don't usually interview anybody. I'm usually my own content creator, my own little space, but I'm like, we need to get more collaborative. We need to get together. Now, to add on to your other points before, because I think it's really important to mention, just because you mentioned so many great things. Political slavery is the root to a lot of it, because you mentioned, we're working like really hard, and toil dollar per dollar. Some people, can barely make it throughout the day, and it's getting worse as time moves on. We see prices are going insane. So a lot of people are going to attribute modern day slavery with economics. And I think they have a great value in doing that. But nonetheless, just as we can look at chattel slavery, there is still roots to that, and it still lives within the mind. And regardless of what's going on, it still lives within the mind. People thinking this job is what needs to make me the money, and that money is what's going to make me happy. And all these underlying belief systems, and money does contribute to some sense of happiness, working for something and getting that something, and hopefully not getting it stolen from some people who proclaim to be authority in the case of government. But that's where you see the political slavery is always in the mix. And if it wasn't for, and Salmon Chase, who's a politician in the 1800s, also admitted this himself, if it wasn't for the government helping the slave owners, they would not have a monopoly to be able to have slaves like they did. He said that private slave owners could not keep up their practice without the government assistance. And you see that even at the end of the Civil War, the government gave reparations to slave owners. I mean, it wasn't a moral cause, but the morality is what drove the first initial foundation. If it wasn't for the abolitionists who were putting out their newspapers, putting out their material constantly, saying, appealing to people's conscience through many different means, not just looking at harm, but looking at ownership, looking at God, God's law, God's government, or however perspective you want to look at it. If it wasn't for them taking that holistic worldview and incorporating so many different people part of it, and being open and saying, no, we're not for violence, and these people who are attacking us, the media that's attacking us, saying that we're violent, they're wrong. If it wasn't for them constantly pulling us out, and William Lloyd Garrison, I mean, the guy, 1800s, he's writing it down on in parchment, everything handwritten by himself. I mean, like, it's crazy. Nowadays we have technology, we can do so much more, but we can look at their efforts and we can learn from them. So that's what I'm doing. And they inspire me because they did something, even though it turned political, because the politicians realized, well, if we need to keep our power and we want to keep our economy going, we have to make sure that we work with what the people want and give them the illusion that we're helping them, give them the illusion that we're ending what they want to end. And well, to be fair, they did end chattel slavery. So to some abolitionists, they thought, oh, that was a win. But to other abolitionists, they said, we're still enslaved in other ways, like Lysander Spooner and William Lloyd Garrison said, and Aidan Ballou and Henry Clark Wright and Jeremiah Hacker and other people that I'm still coming across more and more abolitionists. Some of them are completely unknown by the public. I mean, Jeremiah Hacker, he's only got like one book written about him in this entire world, and yet he has got historical records all throughout Maine, with his newspaper called The Pleasure Boat, which promoted free love and free land, in some cases, free, freedom in general. And these people built their own towns too. Like Aidan Ballou set up Hopedale Community. There were other experiments as well. And these were actually the towns part of the Underground Railroad. It was not an underground operation. It was actually something where it's like, we have a town, you're safe here. Anybody can stay here, whether it's women who were being oppressed at the time, or the black man, or anyone who was a darker skin color being oppressed at the time, right? So they accepted everyone, and they said, hey, no, you're just like us. You're just a human being. What makes you different? You have the same capabilities as us. And guess what? You just weren't educated because your slave master kept it from you. And Frederick Douglass said himself, you can't be a slave if you're going to be educated. If you're educated, you're going to free yourself and you're going to have self-ownership. And then by definition, you can't be a slave. So the same way nowadays, if people are like, wow, we're getting controlled and wow, we're losing our freedoms. Well, how do we gain our freedoms? It is about self-control and building those communities that allow us to express that. So through this project at the End of Slavery Summit, we're bringing people together so we can bring the solutions together and bring the ideas together, bring a holistic worldview as to what slavery is and how it can end. So that's why I call myself an abolitionist. It just means to abolish slavery, right? The denial, as William Lloyd Garrison said in the Liberator newspaper, the denial to make man the property of man. And ultimately, you are your own property. You can say you own your own rights, or you own your own, anything that you create with your own energy, with your own labor. I mean, that's why it shouldn't be stolen from you, right? That's something that you own. So you can look at taxation as probably one of the most prime examples of modern day slavery, political and economic. But we see that, with the free market. This is why you have the ANCAPs going out there, the, anarcho-capitalists. And I look at all these different anarcho labels. I think they all have value somewhere. A lot of the abolitionists came from all many different backgrounds, and the Wikipedia will label them things that they didn't label themselves. Like Lysander Spooner never called himself an anarchist, yet he was being published in anarchist journals like not so long after his time with Benjamin Tucker. And they were very open about it, more so. But you see that a lot of these guys, they just had good intent. They wanted to end slavery. It didn't matter what the media, where people titled them. They just wanted to end slavery. And that's my intent here. It's like, I call myself an abolitionist because I think it's accurate for what we're trying to do. It's a moral cause. We're trying to end something. But ultimately, Do I want to use the word anarchist? Do I want to use the word abolitionist? I'm just a human being like everybody else. Do I want to call someone a statist? It honestly might scare them away. It's like, oh, I'm something. I have a belief system and you don't. It's like, that makes me special. No, it doesn't. Like, we're all the same. That's the point, is that no one gets to decide how everything works. We all work together, and we don't need violence to solve things. We don't need violence to create things. The fact that people actually legitimately believe that violence is necessary for order in society means that people have been duped into believing that freedom is chaos and that they need slavery for order. And that is one of the biggest things that really we're unraveling with these events, and what we will continue to unravel with future events.
Absolutely. You know, you mentioned Spooner. Spooner's been one of the key guys for me because of his essay, No Treason, from 1870. The Constitution of No Authority. And so I start to see myself as like a freedom educator, kind of like you, dropping all these nuggets. I haven't heard about the community you mentioned and some of these things you mentioned. So I'm like, okay, I got to learn this stuff, because I think we'll get into solutions here in a little bit. But first of all, knowing, like, I stopped using the word anarchist because it's been butchered in the media, and even using the word sovereignty, because God bless these police officers who've been trained to, and I've had, you know, when I was doing my right to travel activism, I encountered multiple cops in multiple counties, and they would always, anytime I would just challenge their authority, they say, "Are you a sovereign citizen?" And I started to see this in different jurisdictions, and I'm like, okay, I think this is part of the programming. So I like the word voluntarist, even the word self-owner. And so I think part of, you know, knowledge creation, language creation is a part of the liberation process, you know, helping people identify for what things really are. And I agree with you. I don't like labels, because I don't know what I am other than a living being, a soul with a body that's here doing something amazing inside my body, and like trying to have a great life.
Like, how
and
do we
enjoy
describe
it.
this? You know, it's like we're so magnificent. But that's the thing.
Right.
It's just seeing the value in life, and the value is inherent with everybody, and seeing that within everybody is seeing like the beauty that's there, and not derailing them or saying, well, you are valuable, you must wear a crown and you have more rights than others, or you are not valuable and you have this, you know, low income bracket, or you're supposed to be in this lower class. Like, this the whole idea is dividing within itself. So yeah, I mean, I agree with you. It's important that we identify things. We're always going to title things, but we just don't choose those titles to be part of who we actually are. Like, if somebody says, you know, I'm a diabetic because I have diabetes, it's like, well, you're not actually a diabetic just because you have diabetes. You're just a human being going through the experience of this thing you call diabetes. But that doesn't make you who you are. Naturally, you're not supposed to have diabetes, right? But people are programmed to think, well, oh, I have this, so therefore I must be that, right? So it's sort of like an is-ought fallacy. But yeah, it totally. And to go back to my anarcho-capitalist point, I mean, what they are showing is that the free market can operate on its own without government interference. And that right there challenges the whole idea of economic slavery and brings in the view of political slavery. So it's just saying these two are interrelated. When people want to just look at one or the other, they definitely play a toll on one another. And if we can just end what we know to be immoral first and foremost, then we can expect better results.
Right. Now, what, because you mentioned mental slavery, and I believe that is so true. Some of the people out there may or may not know, but the word government in my research comes from the root gubernare mente, which is control of the mind. So rather in, you know, chattel slavery, control the body, chains, now the chains are up here. And I mentioned the other quote, it's like, if you think you're free, but you're still paying a third of your income to an organization, the city, county, state, and federal governments without your consent, think about that. Out of a 12-month period, that's 4 months of your labor that you're giving to these organizations who are doing stuff you don't approve of. You compound that over a 45-year career from age 20 to age 65, you're talking about 15 years of your life you're working for these organizations. And I saw those numbers. I said, whoa, this is a big problem. So what has been your experience in helping people realize that slavery, or helping them step into their self-ownership? Has there been any questions or processes, or for me, I use like the Lysander Spooner, like little clips of the Constitution of No Authority. I'll plant, places. What have you seen as good seeds to plant, or I don't want to say conversions, because I don't think I'm a converter. I think I'm like Johnny Appleseed of freedom, plant it, and other people water it, and other people the sun. We're talking about decades and generations of serious mind control through our parents, through our grandparents. But have you seen anything that is a good seed that maybe some of the viewers could learn to plant, if they're not articulate like yourself?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all have something to contribute, and I think it's just a matter of how we choose to go about in doing that, and that's a practice that we attain over time. So I'd say questions are the best method. And the reason why is because if you're going to share something with them, have them mention it to you if they're really interested and if they care about freedom. And it's like, wait, so then you want to appeal to people who are already care about freedom? It's like, yeah, because if they have some sense of freedom and they see the value in it, those are the people I am attracting. I recognize I'm not going to be able to help everybody. There's some people who will completely shut me out. There's people who will completely attack me if no matter what I say, no matter how polite I am, no matter what questions I ask. So I think questions are not only the lightest way to do it, but also the way to help the person engage with you. So you don't have to go out saying, well, this is this and this is that. They will ask you for that. And then you can go into it from there. And they will, I mean, they asked for it. It's like, it's not like your fault. You didn't just come out there with like a Bible speech, like a preacher, like this is what you need to know. But yeah, that's the way I prefer to do it, is connect with the individual. And I've talked about this many different times, and I think Larkin Rose has a good method with Candles in the Dark as well. Just asking people questions in a format where it's okay. Is there any contradictions within someone's thinking? Are they trying to get off track and go to different topics? And they're kind of uncomfortable. They want to avoid it. And you see that, but you want to address something that's really important. Like if you think slavery is important, which I would hope it's important to a lot of people, it's like, yeah, you want to address it. And so there shouldn't be really an escape away from it. If you're saying, yeah, pay attention to it. It's something that's going on now. It's something that is hurting people right now. I mean, there's people who are being coerced, right now, and we just don't see it necessarily in our own neck of the woods. But some people have had that experience where they've had personal interference within their lives. And they're like, where are these people? Where are they coming from? What gives them the right to do this and that, to coerce people so much. And you see it with police raids nowadays. I mean, even against streamers, I've seen videos online of streamers, and somebody calls the police and says, oh, the streamer's doing something, because the streamer has millions of followers online, and the police are raiding their house like every single week. It's like, what's going on? It's like these people are living in basic trauma and fear for most of their life because of that. And it's like ridiculous. And I've seen many other experiences with that. And who knows what else goes on, especially in the cities. I'm not in the city area, but I know the cities deal with a lot of problems like that. And it's not just because of crime, it's because of how crime is also handled, right? I mean, we see that a lot of gun violence happens in gun-free zones, areas where people are not armed. So it's like, okay, is really the fault of the criminal, or is it the fault of the systems that allow the criminals, the systems that aggregate the crimes? And that's really what we're looking at, is not, yes, there's always going to be evil. There's always going to be people who want to do wrong. The question is, how much are we allowing that evil? And so understanding all that is coming down to asking questions. And the simplest question that I like to ask a lot of people, I have about 18 questions I introduce in my political slavery video, which I recommend people checking out because it basically goes over all of them. But the simplest question is, do you have the right to take anyone's stuff? They're probably going to say no. Do I have the right to take anybody's stuff? No. Now, can we give that to some group or some select group of individuals and say they have the right? Now, what if it was a town? What if it was millions of people calling themselves a government? Does that still make it, wrong? And it's like, yeah, it's still wrong because the action itself is wrong. It doesn't matter what title, doesn't matter what badge, doesn't matter what you proclaim to have. You don't have the right to steal something that doesn't belong to you. It doesn't belong to you, unless you
Mhm.
want, of course, slavery, in which case you can claim ownership of something that doesn't belong to you. In which
Mm.
case we wouldn't have ended chattel slavery. And that's why another thing is when somebody will bring up a lot of the arguments, and this is another way to plant the seed as to, well, what about this and what about that? Well, who will do this? Who will do that? I will refer to them the fact that people made the very same arguments
Yeah.
against ending chattel slavery. And the fact
Yeah.
that that is completely coincidental is just mind-blowing, because it shows you, yes, because we are talking about the same thing. We're talking about
Mm.
slavery. It's not any different. It's just one form or another. One is more overt, another is more covert. It's like, again, kings and queens to presidents and ministers. Same structure, basically, of giving people rights that don't exist in nature, but we believe they do, and we believe they have some imagined right to rule and can do things that we can't do, and are seen as moral for doing immoral actions. So
Mm.
it's the same premises, no matter what they call themselves. What we're looking at is the actions, and what we're looking at is the individuals. And we all, this knowledge has always been there. This idea of self-ownership and individuals having autonomy over themselves has always been there. It's simply been suppressed by the public through knowledge, as you know, and as you said in your talk, you said it really well. For long, the people who had control of the media was the governments themselves.
Mm.
And once people started releasing that information to the public, they said, no, we don't need the churches or these middlemen between us and our relationship with the creator and
Right.
or God, right? Or nature, however you want to see it, or our rights. I mean, all these ideas of freedom started to spark when people got education in their hands, or they got information that otherwise would have just been kept with the secret societies or the people who
Yeah.
want to keep the knowledge for themselves. We say
Hmm.
knowledge is power. Well, interesting. When you keep certain knowledge away from the masses, what do you expect? A power differential is bound to occur, because
Yeah.
certain people know how to control others' behaviors, and the people that are being controlled don't know how they're being controlled. They
Mm.
don't know how to escape that mind control, because they don't realize it's mind control. They're being mind controlled. So that's mental slavery. Mental
Yeah.
slavery is simply mind control. It's the belief like, yeah, I
Yes.
want to be enslaved, or I think slavery is legitimate and I don't realize it's slavery. I don't realize that my freedoms are being taken away, or I'm given the illusion of freedom. I think I'm free. But when you start doing actions that they don't want you to do, you realize, wait, I'm not actually as free as I think I am, because if I
Mm.
was free, I can do whatever I want, including some of the acts of chaos, right? The
Mm.
difference is, how would those acts of chaos be treated in the free world versus a world where chaos is actually manifest in an unnatural world, a world where man's law has taken precedent over everything in nature, essentially. I
Mm.
have a message that says nature is the answer. It ties in perfectly with this idea, because abolitionism is getting rid of what doesn't belong. It's saying, yeah, slavery is unnatural and immoral. It's both.
Mm.
It's take it out. But what are we adding in? Because in order to take out, we need to add something in. It's like if you have a disease, you want to address it. It's like, well, I need to add a new medicine, or I need to change my diet. I need to add something new in and sort of crowd out the bad. People are always like, well, get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of that in your diet. It's like, okay, if you start being really restrictive in your
Yeah.
diet, it's not going to help you
Replacement.
so much.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But if you add in things gradually over time, you realize, wait, that is better. And as you see in the voluntary world, or as we create these voluntary solutions, they're always better as compared to the violent coercive solutions that are proposed by government. And if I ask anybody that question as well, I say, what do you think should be done about this? What do you think should be done about this? 9 times out of 10, their solution is probably better than what the government is doing right now. And
100%.
if I ask them, would you want to back it by violence? They're probably not going to say yes. But politicians are not going to come out saying openly to them, yeah, I want this to be done, and I'm going to do it by stealing your money, and I'm going to do it by backing it by violence. But that's actually what they're saying every time they want something done, and they're passing it through what is legislation. Even Leo
Mm.
Tolstoy said this himself. He said, all legislation is slavery. Very
Mm.
big claim, but this is a guy who is literally known as one of the greatest writers of all time. He has a whole book on this, probably one of the most modern architects of like this whole idea of modern slavery. In his book, Slavery of Our Times, next to my book, it's like I came across his book. I'm like, this is basically, the closest thing to what I wrote. And the
Mm.
reason why is because he studied the same abolitionist that I studied. Right after the abolitionist time zone in the Civil War, he visited America and he read all the same writings from Lysander Spooner to William Lloyd Garrison and saw all of them. That's why he was also a Christian anarchist, because he saw
Mm.
all their strong foundations in God and the moral foundations that drove their cause. And so that inspired him to become more of a non-resistant himself and share a lot of their ideas, as well as including other ideas from his friends and other people from Russia, which, originally is where he's from. So, a lot of interesting history. You can see there's so much philosophy behind it, and nobody learns any of these people in school. And maybe you'll learn a little bit about Frederick Douglass, a little bit about William Lloyd Garrison, but they never tell you that William Lloyd Garrison was against all institutions, including voting, including participating in the system, because he saw it was legitimizing the systems of slavery. And they never tell you that, Frederick Douglass was basically saying taxation is theft at the time in his own writings, in his own narrative. Right. He wrote a whole autobiography about himself. So if people don't know about this, I mean, it's all out in the open, and historians are going to have to keep up. The fact that historians are not being honest about this and haven't been looking at it, and I'm finding it, I think is pretty sad, because I'm actually running into people who have not heard of me or my work, who are coming to the same conclusions as me. And that's how I know I'm on the right track with this. I've met people, and I'm actually going to a partnership with someone. His name is William H. Douglas, and he's going to be my co-contributor, essentially. We're both like the main host or editors of the next project after the summit, which is going to be called The Liberator 2. We're going to continue the old Liberator newspaper from the 1800s, and this time we're going to end all forms of slavery.
That is glorious, man. So important that people out there realize that you can do something, and even when you're dead, if you make a written document, video document now, audio piece, people who come after you can do something with it. And this is where I'm promoting Lysander Spooner. I'm not as familiar with some of the people you're mentioning, so I'm grateful that you're sharing that with me in the audience. But one piece that you're able to create can perpetuate. 1870, Spooner wrote that essay, and I tell people it's more relevant today than it was then. And because the media did lose control over the last 25 years or so, the whole system of slavery and the hyper-wealthy, intergenerational, organized predators, they're under threat right now. They've controlled a lot of people's minds very easily, and now the genie is out of the bottle. And I'm very excited. I'm very hopeful. There is a caveat, I think, to the awakening, which is I imagine if I myself, as the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, the dudes who we don't even know, maybe there's more wealthier people than that, imagine them, and they must be like, biting their nails and just like, oh my gosh, like, what are we going to do about this thing? And it's like, well, there's nothing you can do, man. We know what you're up to. You want a global totalitarian state. You want to make a world religion and world culture. And this divide and conquer stuff is no longer is working. What's your take on some of the modern, let's say, current events? Because we're in December 2022. Kanye West is coming out. God bless him. He's still a statist, but he's think he's doing something. We
always have faith.
Yeah, exactly. So he's realizing something's wrong. He wore the red cap for Trump, in 2016 or whatever. So he's like realizing there's mind control going on. It's no longer about left, right fighting. It's about you will shut up and you will do what you say because you're black and you're no longer to do this. Like you, Trump was not my hero, and I have no hope in politicians in general. Ron Paul helped me, and he, of course, didn't pass any legislation, but he did say he uses platform for education. So I wish some of the politicians out there use their platform to educate people. What's your take on what Kanye is doing, and even Elon Musk, if you care to opine on either of those two fellas?
So education, I mean, of course, is the only surest way to liberty, as some of our founding fathers have said, and many of the oldest philosophers have said, many of which also have gotten killed by their own governments because they were trying to educate people. Interesting how that works. And then you look at the story of Jesus Christ or other similar figures throughout history, and you start to see a trend that the people who want to create freedom or challenge the systems that be end up getting attacked for that. There's a strong case to be made for a lot of that. But for modern events in history, and you mentioned something interesting, you're like, how is it that these elites can stop people? And you're right, they can't stop a destiny, something that is inherent within our nature. That is our ability to breathe, our ability to speak, our ability to think, our ability to anything that is within our capacity and our nature. But the thing is, they realize that without health, you can't do any of those things.
Yeah.
And if you keep a slave with few possessions, you keep them, constantly independent, and you keep them unhealthy, they're always going to be dependent, and they're going to actually want to be a slave because they have no choice but to be. And they feel like they have no choice. And that's the biggest thing. Again, the mental part is always part of it. So it's like, you're still the ultimate decider. Even if they strip you bare, you have nothing. Like Gandhi basically went to jail for his belief systems. He was willing to do so because of how strong he believed in his principles. I don't know how many people today are willing to go to jail for their own principles, but that's the point to where humanity might have to go, recognizing consumerism and all these ideals and the titles and identities and all this jazz is not actually the solution. It's actually, the consciousness, the education, and standing on principle. That's the only way we're going to attain real freedom. But when it comes to a lot of this, frankly, that's why I have the message nature is the answer, because it's more relevant for the future than anything. And it's more relevant at all times, actually, but it's going to be more relevant in times of need. And that's why I created that whole structure of a movement, I put in quotes, is really just to share that idea and remind people of who they are. Because over time, we're losing a sense of identity of ourselves, since there is a direct attack on our nature, being that we're enslaved, we're not in alignment to who we are supposed to be. If you're saying we're supposed to be free, you're saying that is our nature. That is what we're supposed to be. So to say we're not, of our nature, then we are going to have a lot of false pretenses, a lot of lies, and a lot of illusions that we've wrapped ourselves into. And I have a book about honesty that I will be sharing with a lot of people, but a lot of it comes down to honesty. And that's another thing I do with people asking them questions, is like, I want to get their honest point of view. I don't want to get the point of view of their ideology or the people they follow. I want to get their own personal view on what's going on. Like, so many people nowadays are like asking me for my opinion on things. I want you to think for yourself, right? Like, I don't want you to start looking to other people for all the answers. That's part of the problem, right? It's like, if you didn't have technology and all this mass communication, you'd be living your own life, doing your own thing, and not worried about these people millions of miles away or whatever, millions of people and these huge policies and these decisions, which half of it you're taking on faith because you don't even know if it's actually going on. It's not in your own neighborhood. But it's just unbelievable. So we fall for a lot of unnatural things in today's world, whether it's food or, information, because we can't prove it for ourselves. But nonetheless, that is where the elites are going to have their foothold, is in manipulating the human genetics, the human being in general. That's the only way they can stop this. And they've recognized that, I think. I mean, because you see it with what's happening lately, with injecting people and, the food supply and what chemicals they've put in it over the many years. And when I say they, I really refer to ourselves, because again, it's the mental slaves, the order followers who follow the rules or the the orders of compliance from select few, like these masters, these people who say, well, if you don't do this, you're going to lose your job. If you don't do this, you can't feed your family. It's like, okay, so I have to violate someone else's family, violate someone else's life for my own life. And people have to realize how egoic that is, and how that's not actually in the pursuit of truth. And you're actually helping people gain a monopoly. You're helping people gain a foothold over nature itself. And, this is what I call man-made authority, is people saying, well, yeah, we can change the human genetics. We can change the human body. We can change the world. We can be the God of the world. We can decide for everybody what the rules are, tell them how to do it. We can enforce it ourselves. We can do everything by man. Like, man could just change everything. Transhumanism, go all out, change our genders, change everything. Right? And that's where it's coming down to. And then no wonder why the populace and the new generation is growing up confused and not knowing who they are or what they should do or who they should marry, because they're like, I don't know what world I live in. They don't know the world they live in, and they don't have other people also to support them along the way, like parents or people who are loving enough to be always there for them. So it's like, of course they're going to be confused. Of course they're going to be depressed. Of course they're going to have anxiety. And for me to say, of course, when people are like, oh, this is a disorder we don't know about and no one knows how to treat it and we don't know where it comes from. It's like, look around the world. Do you not think freedom has any relationship with what's going on in people's health and people's mentality? Because I guarantee you it does. The slave is going to be happy if they accept their condition of slavery. They're going to have a lot of hardship if they start to go against their master, and they realize that's a process of courage. But once they become free, they become ever happier that they could ever be, because they realize that is what they're supposed to be. Like, you're actually free for once. Like, wow, this is great, until you realize you're under a system of government. That's what happened in the end of the Civil War. It's like, oh, well, you're free now, but you're not entirely free because you still have to play under these guys' rules. Like, right. But that's the thing. And it's just a process. You can look at America, the 1700s, as a foundational point of view of, wow, here are natural rights. We're free. We're all created equal. And then the 1800s of saying, oh, well, we're all equal, like, let's not just make it all like few people. And let's not assume we, the people, is just a few, assuming the consent of all the rest, as Lysander Spooner said. So, let's look at this greater. Let's bring consent into the picture. Let's bring ownership into the picture. Let's apply it to everybody. Let's apply it to the world. And now as we move further, now we have technology, now we have education, we can get to the end of slavery. And that's why I named the summit the End of Slavery Summit, because honestly, we're approaching the end. Which is why a lot of people are like, this is the end times. It's like, no, it's not the end times. This is the optimal times. If we want to create change, we can do it, because we have all the knowledge at our fingertips. We have all the ability and the resources here for us. We can literally do anything, and technology is rapidly evolving all the time. So that is what is equally dangerous but equally powerful for good, is the ability to have technology. So it's a double-edged sword in many ways. You can use it for good or use it for bad. It's a tool. You can choose what you want to do with it. If you don't use it for good, well, then these people who are using it for bad are going to continue in their ways. And that's why we need a lot more people using it for good, for knowledge. And then technology can be free just like the rest of the world. And people can have access to so much text. Like back then, they would have had no access to at all, unless you go to some special library with some special, text, hopefully not burnt down. Hopefully the parchment is still, there. And it's like, these people wrote things down all manually. It's insane. I still can't even find some abolitionist newspapers from 200 years ago. I have to go to special libraries to get access to them. I have to ask for permission from these schools, and I have to be a certain student on campus. I have to log in. It's like, just for a public newspaper, I'm like, what is going on here? If I want to educate myself, it's even harder nowadays, but we still have so many resources. So while we have the chance, we need to use them. And this is why they're also censoring people. So although we see, you and I were very optimistic, I tend to look at the good light of things as well. We do see they are fighting with us when it comes to health, and they are fighting with us when it comes to knowledge. And they're doing that through censorship and suppression of the disease, whether they're giving you a pill to the ill and suppressing what's going on, but not actually fixing the problem. Or in the case of knowledge, they're suppressing the knowledge and giving you an illusion of knowledge and negative knowledge, may you say. Something that you think is informing you when really it's not important. Like, oh, wow, this person that I don't know millions of miles away did this thing. And it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I guess that's true because they said so.
Right. Well, let's talk about that, because one of my groups is called Voluntary Village Creators. And I was going to Acapulco 6 years in a row, because after I saw Ron Paul get his election stolen, in my opinion, 2012, I started getting deeper into Murray Rothbard and Spooner and the Mises Institute. And I was like, oh man, like these guys don't believe in authority or, government power. This is awesome. LouRockwell.com really helped me too. And so I'm like, okay, we're going to this annual event of freedom, and we'll call it Voluntarists. And I'm like, this is great. 1 week, 2 weeks, but then the event would end. I'd say goodbye to Cory or other cool freedom people that are there. And I have to wait a whole year to see my buddies again, And so I'm like, okay, we got to build something locally and permanently. And so that's why I started the Santa Cruz Voluntarists and some of the other groups, because we were having a bonfire every week and I would say, we don't have a building yet. I want to get a community center, and we're paying membership dues, But right now, this beach right here, this is our headquarters right here. So, every week we're going to be gathering here, and I call it a voluntary solutions bonfire. So it was about a permanent community. I'm curious what you envision or what you dream of, or maybe something like the community that you mentioned. I think you said it was in Maine. I think there is significant value and almost necessary value in community. We got to have it.
Yes.
So there's knowledge, there's technology, but then there's us. So like you and I, we're two guys. We get together, create a community, and we do online stuff. But then there's in-person things as well. So I don't know what you think about the bridge between technology and in-person meetings, or any types of envisions or visions of the future that you might want to share, because you've obviously gone very deep, and you've studied some of the top guys on the planet in human history for freedom, and really where we're going. I really get excited talking with you. So what do you see for communities? You want to share kind of maybe some of the pictures that you might envision?
Yeah, and hey, those people you mentioned before, Elon Musk and Kanye West, I mean, these guys have money. If they want to do something, they can start it up real fast. I mean, all it takes is a trending hashtag on Twitter, and it's done. This whole show is done. It's over. If people start talking about statism, natural law, real anarchy, voluntarism, abolitionism, I mean, the end of slavery, I mean, it's over. Once these ideas get out there, that's frankly what it is. Because you're going to have a conversation that the media will not be able to stop. And you're going to have people getting on information that they're going to find irresistible, like we're finding. It's like, wow, this is nuggets of gold we can't resist. So the point is education is always the main action. And I would look at those guys no different, no matter what they're doing. Even the politicians, no matter what they're doing, no matter how evil everybody thinks they are, I'm still going to respect them as a fellow human being, because if I think they're any different from me, I'm playing into their game of thinking I'm different from them. And I'm not here to play the games of division. They are. They want to divide people. I don't. So when it comes to building communities, I love what you're doing. And I think that's great. And more people need to look into doing that. And I think it's sort of inevitable. I think having to build communities, and the more I look at this, the more inevitable I see that it is, that we need to do that. Absolutely. So there's people who are working on many different projects. I've had some people reach out to me, and I made a video dedicated to this. It's titled, "Do you know any freedom communities out there?" And I did that on purpose because I want to know what's out there. And I know some people are probably not going to want to share it and be like, "I want to keep the secret,"
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But you see, like, it doesn't have to be secret. I mean, we want a lot of people to get involved, and we want enough people, especially in America, who are armed to have their own communities, because that can create a great ripple effect throughout the country. If there's any country that's going to free themselves first, I think absolutely it's going to be in America, because you see there's uprisings in China, but those people are going to be unfortunately, easily, what's the word, quartered by the police and by the military there, because the military, they're mental slaves. They're going to follow orders, and unless those people that are protesting appeal to those police or appeal to those very people in those uniforms, those people in uniforms are not going to think for themselves. Which is why I open it up to everyone. I say, Elon Musk, you're my friend. Hillary Clinton, you're my friend. Everyone's my friend, but of course, my brothers and sisters are the ones fighting for truth and fighting for humanity, I would consider. So in China, though, it's like they don't have the ability to self-defend themselves. They don't have guns.
Big problem. Big problem.
Right. And that is the best thing that our founding fathers did for America. Again, they were building blocks. And for them to say you have the right to bear arms is huge, which is why we're still freer than most places in the world. Okay. Now I can't say we're entirely free, or that no, obviously there's problems everywhere. Of course. I mean, that's how life works. But of course, especially when you're under a system which inherently is illegitimate, inherently is an aggregation of all wrong action, then you see, in which inherently is slavery, then you see it's going to cause problems, of course. So getting out of that is creating freedom. I mean, that's basically the opposite of slavery, is it not? So the only way to practice freedom is to practice self-ownership. The only way to practice self-ownership is grow your own food, get in charge of your own health in one way or another, get in charge of your own knowledge, get in charge of your own community, just get in charge of everything you can within your life. And if other people are not in control of it and you're in control of it, then you are as most free as you can be. So But if you're working on it with others, then you're all free, because everybody's voluntarily pitching in. No one is giving each other violence upon having to do one thing or another. And sure, some people might be morally compelled to do one thing or another. Some people might feel like they're compelled to do one thing or another. But if there's no violence, it's not slavery. If there's no people saying you have to follow my orders or else, or nobody saying I'm more special than you, and then it's not slavery. So some people on the left-wing anarchism, people want to say, people who follow socialism and communism, I think they're well-intentioned to say, hey, you can set up communes, you can set up communities, and you can do things like that. Great, as long as it's all voluntary. As long as it's all voluntary, you can set whatever systems they want, and people can choose where they want to associate. There's many millions of solutions. And so getting to the point of freedom, which has millions of solutions, is creating solutions, and that is being the change, walking the talk. So if you talk about freedom, you're doing it. You're already building communities. I'd say you're walking the talk. Me, myself, I'm a youngling. I have to still build more connections in real life, but I'm working on it, which is why I made my video, which is why I'm building up the education, why I'm networking with a lot more people. And I think there's a lot of people who are in my position who haven't really started on building communities yet. And I admit to that. I'm willing to be honest. I haven't done that much on that part yet, but I plan to do so. And that's why I'm looking into moving different places and checking out different communities, because I want to get together with like minds, or people who are generally on the same page with freedom. They're open to freedom. They want to be free, and they want to create the solutions now. So yes, I think it's inevitable, and people should start doing it no matter where they are, but especially in America.
Yeah, no, a lot of great points. One, let me acknowledge you first. You are building community online with your content and such. So there's physical community, there's online community. One of the reasons it's really exciting what you're doing is because you're putting yourself out there. You put your name out there, you're making videos, you're interviewing people. That's what I experienced. Once I started realizing that government authority is illegitimate, I would talk with other people, and they're afraid because of the MK Ultra or the psychological warfare, whatever it is, of maybe Edward Snowden, they're tracking you, or, these devices, they're listening. Fear. And it's like, yeah, exactly. So it's like, yeah, they're listening, but there's not like a billion people, listening like this on the movies. Okay. So a lot of people out there, you probably know, but they use television and media to create the idea of like they're always around, and, they're coming to get you. We're like, you brought up, they're 1,000 miles away. They're not coming, okay?
And there's still people like you and I. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So this is where it's like, okay, where I was at in Santa Cruz County, I'm no longer there because I found out it was super statist, okay, super lefty, God bless them. I was outnumbered. But now where I'm at in a rural place, a lot of people, unfortunately, they're more right-wing, but they're just like, leave us alone, government. And it doesn't matter, left wing, right wing, I don't care what side you're on. It's just leave me alone. Right. Stop taking my stuff, stop telling lies to my kids. And then you get together and you start to have these kind of conversations. I think some of the solutions you mentioned are great, is independent food, independent water, technology, knowledge, these types of things, because it's intergenerational. I think what we're dealing with here, and this is, more and more, once I keep like regurgitating and chewing on what I'm learning, I'm like, I can't believe this is going on the planet right now. Like, what is going on? So it's like, since 9/11 and the Federal Reserve and the school system and, the pharmaceutical cartels and, all these things, I'm like, wow. So it can become overwhelming. But one of the great mini films I saw was called the Man Who Planted Trees. And a very cool cartoon on YouTube you can watch. But it's basically this guy who planted stuff, and he knew he wasn't going to be around to see the trees, but because of his diligence and his commitment, one guy, though, the animals came back, other plants came back, and it was a beautiful oasis, basically. And it's a great story of one guy. So whether that's you or me or all these people, that's what it is. They're afraid of one man or one woman like Gandhi, who's willing to put it all on the line and say, you know what, I've had enough. I didn't realize the life of Gandhi as much because of, focus on other things. But the 1982 film Gandhi won all these awards. I watched it recently. A lot of good quotes in that film. One of them, he says, I'm willing to die for the cause, but I'm not willing to kill for it. I'm like, say that again, because he was all about nonviolence,
Right.
non-cooperation,
If you're going to do things
non-participation.
in mass, absolutely. So like people, if they're going to do protest or something in mass, best thing to do is stay away even from some means of self-defense, because the
Yeah,
people who will use violence will expose themselves. And by you
sure.
self-defending, it might be like, oh, who threw the first punch? Oh, it might have been him. Was it him or was it him? Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, they both were fighting each other. They're all causing chaos. So look at how
That's right.
violent they are. It's like,
Kill them all. Yeah, shoot them all. Right,
yeah,
exactly.
it's like it becomes worse. Yeah.
Yeah, so one of the things in the film, he was teaching his guys, and by the way, the film talks about how there was a salt ban. You couldn't sell salt. So he's like walking 200 miles. We're going to go to the salt and we're going to go sell salt. Screw you guys. Anyways, he's like, when they start beating you, okay, you have the soldier and you have the guys, okay? And when they start beating you, he says, don't strike back, because what happens is that when you strike back, you don't know who's the actual aggressor and who's defending themselves. But when you stay, non-violent, the aggressor, he starts to see he's the bad guy. And so you're a limp noodle and he just beating you and beating you. All of a sudden, he sees himself and he starts to have a higher respect for you and lose respect for himself. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to increase the morale of the freedom, peace people,
Right.
decrease the morale of these violent people. Again, this is not to say we don't want people to have a living.
Right.
We want people to have a living. Dale Brown and Threat Management
Have the
Center
ability to self-defense, not that you'll use it.
Yep, that's right. And even like 3D printed guns, I'm all for that, man. Great. Just be on defense rather than offense. And so that seems to be some of the weapons, is psychological and spiritual warfare, because, we don't get to choose how we go, but we can choose how we live. Meaning we don't get to choose how we die, but we get to choose how we live, and one day this game is going to be over and something magical is going to be next, I believe. But for the time being, let us connect with other freedom lovers, peace lovers, self-owners, people that want to create and actually be part of the solution. Because if we realize, which your summit's doing so well, the left-right paradigm is a bunch of baloney. It's actual slavery. And so, this book talks about it, you're still allowing it. So are there any, I don't know, solutions to ending it other than, okay, we understand in our mind that the government is illegitimate. Is it just independent food, independent water, independent technology? Is that what you see as the interim bridge until we can get to this world where everybody realizes that government's illegitimate in a mafia gang? Or what do you see as the interim, that what we can do between now and whenever this, kind of next world is created?
I think there has to be some sense of a movement. And the reason why I say that is because it's been always movements that help change things in history. Now, what I mean by movement, I don't mean necessarily people have one banner, one flag, one message. Okay, because abolitionism is more so a philosophy rather than even a movement, but it's usually considered a movement throughout history. But you can't say there's one flag or one message backing it. It was really just a moral cause that brought movements and societies and leagues and towns and meetings together in newspapers. It was of all different types of names, of all different types of people. And so that's what I think is necessary, is, to make a historical point of view, and that's what it is we need to introduce all forms of different media, as long as we all share one same message, which is we want freedom. We understand that freedom we can only get through understanding statism, understanding slavery, and therefore we must end that immoral system that legitimizes immoral behavior. And that is simple. It's simply promoting morality. So yes, and a lot of the abolitionists, funny you mentioned Gandhi, you can look at Martin Luther King Jr. and other figures that practiced what was usually called civil disobedience. The abolitionists called it non-resistance, and a lot of them were non-resistance. I mean, you're talking most of them. And Lysander Spooner was one of them who was a little bit on the fence. He was always the outsider of everybody. Lysander Spooner was never joining any particular group or anything like that. And that's why he was pretty respected too among every group, because he appealed to lawyers on one end while he also appealed to the average person on the other end. Whereas, William Lloyd Garrison was like, no, the Constitution is always wrong. It supported slavery, burn it, and he burned it in the streets, and he says all these things. And even though Lysander Spooner would agree with that, he used the Constitution to also prove that slavery is wrong. So, it's like, it's interesting. You're going to have some feuds within the movements. Of course, you're going to have some people having some things like that. But if they all agree, like, yeah, slavery is wrong, it doesn't really matter. If they're getting the message out, it doesn't matter how they're doing it, as long as it's peacefully, it's not contradictory to the cause, then it will be helpful. So I think people should just do something, whether it's creating content one way or another. I have a whole video on tons of resources where people can get started, and they don't just have to do video content. They can send me an article. I'll turn it into a video for them. That's the next project, the newspaper project. They can submit radio to the radio project that I'm starting soon. They can do art. They can do poetry. They can send that too. They can do so much. And to limit our potential to one method, I think would be, wrong of me to do, because I think the solutions out there are plentiful for people, as there is in freedom. So if we want to create freedom, then let's allow all the solutions to manifest. And then the greatest solutions will, of course, rise to the top, especially dependent on the time and age and what's currently going on in the world. You see with what's going on in the past few years, how many people on the health side started moving toward the freedom side, because they realized you can't have health without freedom. And the same is going to happen with economy. Think about it. When the world collapses or a lot of problems happen with the economy, a lot more people on the economy side of things, maybe it's all businesses, small businesses, mom and pop stores or what have you, they're all going to start to go to the freedom side as well, because they're going to realize, oh, gee, I can't have my business without freedom. Everyone's soon going to realize that they cannot live their life or do what they want in life without freedom, because freedom is the foundation to all of it. And slavery says you can't do that because we said so, because the majority said so, because this group said so. It's like, no, if I'm free, I get to decide my own fate in my own life. You don't get to decide my fate for my life. Like, otherwise you're God. You're claiming to have some sort of right, which you're claiming to have. I never gave that to you. I never consented. Oh, I was born into the world. I had to sign a birth certificate. I was a baby. How was I supposed to know? It's like, goodness gracious. But those are examples, right? So you can start by not signing those certificates, trying to get out of the system as much as possible, finding different solutions, connecting with different people, and just make your network. And as you build up, things will happen on its own. So while I want to give you maybe a more specific answer, I think that's it, because who's to say what the future looks like? I mean, especially when in a world of mass information and mass technology, something can change tomorrow, right? Something immediate can happen. Like I said, something can go trending on Twitter that changes this whole conversation, and next thing you know, everyone's talking about it. And like, we were like some of the few people were talking about it, and now there's millions of people talking about it, and we're just going to be swept down the hole. It's like, and then people are going to probably find us later in time, like I'm finding the abolitionists back in the day, and you're like, oh, look at these people who were sounding the alarms. It's just sort of history on repeat. But to say that it is just a repeat and that there is no part of evolving is a lie, because we're always evolving. Technology is new. It's not something that has always existed. Yes, governments have sort of always existed, but not really. About 6,000 years according to history. Slavery, same thing, about 6,000 years, because, well, the first form of government was the first form of slavery, but I guess we'll just say that's another coincidence. But nonetheless, it is an evolution. We ended a system that was there for thousands of years. If we can end that system, we can end another system that was there for thousands of years. They both apply to the same morality, that you are you and I am me, and we should not transgress against another person. We should not violate each other's rights. We should respect each other. We should honor each other. And that is what honesty is, honor.
So important, man. Honor is such a great word. And of course, going through public school myself, and, public university and all these things, you don't hear about that. But like, I really see you as a king. I really see myself as a king, and the women around me as queens. And what that means is, this is my domain. That's your domain. And so when I'm speaking to people, I'm starting to realize how I spoke to them in the past is not going to help me in the future. It's respecting their soul and their life right now, because they're a living being. They are consciousness. And I think there is something really amazing about this ability to articulate, this ability to be here. And I was in down in the near the farms area, we'll say, and it was an honor system, and you would walk into this farm, and we want to go support the local farmers and ranchers and such. So we walk in there, and a small little room, and there's lettuce and different like corn over there and eggs or whatever, and there's like nobody there, and it just had little price sign there, and it's like, here's how it is. Deposit your money in the little box over there, and here's the milk or whatever. And I was just like, are you kidding? And I was looking for video cameras and I didn't see anything. I'm like, wow, how inspiring it is to be in a business that is focusing on honor and trust. And we went to another farm later, and I said, similar, she was selling flowers and eggs, and she had the box out there, and she says, oh yeah, you can come out here, we do honor system. I said, can I ask you a question? Has anybody ever stolen the box with the money? And she's like, yeah, one time in 10 years. And I just figured, you know what, if that person needed to steal the money, they probably really needed it. And she was like totally forgiving and totally understanding. So that's there amazing. Is this high level of humans.
That's non-resistance. Yeah.
Yeah. Where it's just like, you know what, if everybody has that type of abundance mentality, that honor mentality, I think this is where it's going. So they're just kind of maybe on the front end of it. But I agree, the movement is coming, and it's going to come under a bunch of different whatever leaders or people or whatever churches or organizations. But it seems that the unifying principle is going to be freedom of choice.
Yes.
And I don't force you to do something. You don't force me to do something. Can we agree? Yes. You know, like, I don't care if there's an atheist and a Christian and a Muslim or a Catholic or whatever. Like, we all believe in freedom of choice around here, right? Yes. Okay, then let's get along on that, because trying to get along about the Constitution or your politician versus my politician is all this low-level divisive stuff.
Which violence should we use? The one that's more coercive or less coercive?
Exactly. Right. And I think that's the conversation. I'm glad you said that earlier, which is without violence, it's not slavery. You know, it's like, that's a great point, you know, because if you're saying I have to do this, like when the cops would say, you know, show me your identification or whatever, and I learned to be nice with them, I say, sir, I know you're just doing your job. What if I don't show you my license? What are you going to do to me? And so at that point, well, I'm going to pull you out of the car. I'm going to put cuffs on you. I'm going to whatever. I'm like, oh, in that case, you're going to use violence against a peaceful man. I didn't realize that we're going to have a violence encounter here. Here's my identification. I had a couple encounters like that, and where you got to stay respectful versus like, what are you going to do to me? You know, you can't be a jerk about it, but it's like, you know what, if I don't do that, I just want to know what my options are, sir. What are you going to do to me? And so you want to expose that violence. And you said that earlier. So it's like, that's exactly right. It's just violence. It's do what you're told, or I'm going to hurt you. And maybe that's going to be the campaigns of 2024, you know, like, we don't want slavery because we don't want your red violence, your red slave master to, you know, defeat my blue slave master or whatever it is, you know, some type of language. And the last thing was like,
well, yeah, I'm doing a non-political campaign in 2024 as well.
Oh, you want to share some of the seeds on that? Share some of the seeds on that?
Well, the thing is that everybody thinks you need politics to make a change in any regards of this world. It's like, basically, oh, we need slavery, we need violence in order to create change. It's like, are you crazy? That's basically what they're saying. But so what I'm doing is, again, purely educational cause. And it's funny that you mentioned all the values and non-resistance, because some people who watch this may not understand that if they're very pro-gun, very pro-Second Amendment. And I'm not against that. You and I were very pro-Second Amendment, but we're just not Second Amendment. We're pro just gun ownership in general, because you have the right to defend yourself however means necessary. But we're asking, is it always necessary? And I think more times than not, I mean, you want to end a dispute peacefully. Most people want to resolve disputes peacefully, unless, of course, they're like in the doctrine of, I need to always make sure if somebody steps on my land, I'm going to shoot them. It's like, obviously, that's not probably the best way to handle things. But some people may get that way because the media and all these narratives and these ideologies are pushing people toward extremes where it's like, I won't touch a gun at all, or I'm going to hold this gun. It's basically my baby, a ligament of my body, right? It's like a phone that people can't get rid of their body. It's like, I need this, it's a body part. But one way or another, the way I see this is a transition process. As the education and the knowledge gets out there and people start with a peaceful effort, some degrees of violence in the form of self-defense, which isn't violence, I would just call it force, or just the rightful use of force, some people would say. It's just self-defense. It's not violence. Violence is actively aggressing upon someone and, saying, I want to hurt you, with basically throwing the first punch, essentially. Self-defense is defending, preventing the first punch. But, that again, that's more so done in an individual case, not so much in a collective, because it can get confusing. The point is that you need to understand time and place, right? There's a time and place to use violence. There's a time and place to use peaceful means of settling things. And again, violence, I mean self-defense in this case. Some people are going to dispute all day about force versus violence versus aggression versus self-defense. You get the point. Where I'm saying is, like, you have the right to protect yourself, as any animal would in nature. But you have to understand you're also a higher animal than those animals in nature. You can, if you choose, use your moral conscience. You might say, hey, person who wants to do harm to me, what do you want? Do you want something from me? I'll help you. I mean, you seem like you're a troubled person. Maybe they broke into your house and you're like, hey, I'll give you what you want if you just be nice to me. We can be friends. I'm sorry that you're going through this. Some of the abolitionists made some very strong cases for pacifism or non-resistance back in the day, where it's like you read and you start to realize, wow, these guys were really humble because of their point of view. Nonetheless, I know some people are going to dispute about that. The point is that it comes in time where we see the need that we have to self-defend ourselves. When push comes to shove, and Lysander Spooner realized this. The abolitionists who were pacifists, they change their minds as time moves on, because there has to be a point in time where you say, I'm willing to defend myself, because somebody's just going to use might at the end of the day. If they really want to keep their control, they're going to use all the might they can to keep that control. That's what they're going to do. They're going to try to push every order follower onto the rest of the people as much as possible. And they will say, oh, this order follower is not complying, we'll just find another one, until we still get what we want. And so they're going to keep looking for slaves who will do their bidding. And we, the people, don't want to be slaves. So these people who are the slaves, we have to convince them and say, you're not supposed to be slaves. We're not slaves. Look at us. We're enjoying our lives. We're peaceful, like you said. And why do we have to be slaves like you? I mean, clearly you don't want to do this. You don't want to coerce me. You don't want to cause a conflict. Why do you have to create a conflict? And just appeal to the moral conscience. And that can end all the conflict. But if those people continue to do that, if you have enough people who say, no, enough is enough, then you have to defend yourself. And is that a revolutionary war? Is that a civil war? It's an awakening. That's what it is. Because some people have the morality on their side, and the other people don't. And one way or another, you have to back right with might. But as long as the might is right, then the might is not being right. You understand? Like, the might is acting in alignment with right. So the might is not becoming what is right. And that is what we have in today's systems of control, is where the might is right. If you don't follow this whatever is written on a piece of paper, you are going to be coerced. So that's not saying do what is right. It's saying do what's on a piece of paper. Basically, do what we say. That's might, just purely might. Because if it was moral, it would say, okay, well, how do you feel about this? Okay, well, is this a better choice? Now, why is it a better choice? And it gets to the heart of the matter. It seeks voluntary interaction, and it really respects individual choice. But no, we live in a system where it doesn't respect individual choice. It's either the majority or a few or one person over many other people. So yeah, we can defend ourselves easily if we get many people together. And so that's going to happen in time, I would say, because there's going to be some people who want to use violence or health measures, poison the population or what have you, in order to get what they want.
Yeah. And as we wrap up here, I'm shocked that some of these figureheads of some of these organizations that have harmed so many children and elderly people over the last 2.5 years, even before that. Okay. So these medical murderers, how are they still walking on the planet? I don't have kids yet, but if somebody did that to my kids or my grandparents or something like that, my mother, my father, I can understand why Japanese people do kamikazes, or Muslims or whoever does,
I can understand. Right.
Yeah. It's like, at some point, to have respect for yourself and your family and your heritage, you got to do what you believe is right. And if somebody is openly, raping your daughter or doing something terrible over here, it's hard to sit back and say, I'm going to be passive and do that. So this is to say, I'm glad you said, back the right with might. It's just they use statism to train young teenage men and women to go over to other countries to mass murder Afghanis, Iraqis, Japanese, Koreans, Vietnams, Bosnians and Serbians, like that's like Kosovo. It's just like, well, how long has this been going on for? Well, some of you guys might know about General Smedley Butler in the late 1800s, early 1900s, who wrote a book called War is a Racket. And he said, it's sad that we told these guys they were fighting for freedom when it was about dollars and cents. So again, the truth pill is so heavy on all these things. So I'm so glad you're an optimistic, positive guy like me, because I had to break through the darkness, and find the hope, which is myself and you and my loving people around me, the people that we can do it together, versus you go some places and it's like, let's talk about all the dark, disempowering, weak stuff, low vibration, and let's just be sad about it. And it's like, no. You know what? I'm going to leave this planet at some point, and I hope to plant a seed like Spooner did.
Do your best.
Or do my best, John Gatto or Douglas or whatever. We're dealing with the awakening, the enlightenment, and Thoreau would probably be a voluntarist, and maybe Emerson,
Yes.
So there's a lot of people who kind of like discreetly were like, governments, organized crime, and illegitimate. And so now people like you and I are actually calling it out. And so I'm really excited about that, because, we're not alone anymore. They try to isolate you with a scamdemic the last few years, feel afraid. Well, this is a tactic of collectivism and communism, you're all by yourself. But what I discovered is that, some things I can't do by myself, but together, the power of two, we can do. Power of three, we can do. And that's how we safety and strength in numbers. And I think that's the beauty of the voluntarist movement, of the self-ownership awakening that is happening, where people are like, you know what, I think this election's a fraud, and I think these guys are lying, and I think the Federal Reserve is terrible. And it's like, there's this gap that they have to bridge really quickly, because it's called the Great Reset, because they know they got to reset this fiat money. As a Zero Hedge says, all fiat currencies return to its true value, zero. So they're trying to get these digital currencies in. And I think the RFID chip, which maybe that's a conversation for a later date, but I think we should do it. I really enjoyed talking with you, but to realize that they're desperate right now. And so the people are the sleeping giant, and to have hope and to realize, that might get a little bit roughy on the seas here, but I think there is victory, in our destiny, and sooner than we might think. And so important to speak it into existence. So what are the final words you want to share with the community here? Cory, you're author of this book, you did this summit, you got a lot of cool projects you coming up. Thanks for letting us peek, behind the curtain there and see what you're up to. Very, very empowering work. What are your final words to some of the people out there? They want to build a voluntary world. We love freedom, and we want to find solutions. And we covered some of them here. What are your final words of wisdom you want to let the people hear?
I want people to stay tuned and get involved, because the projects that I make are open for all the public. And, I'm making projects that collaborate as many people as possible. So definitely get involved. This is using technology to our benefit. But you mentioned so many great points. And I would like to say that no matter what, if you're fighting for the truth, you're going to win. Because history shows this. And again, although history shows that, some of the pacifists of the 1800s proved out to be wrong, and that's why they changed their minds, they were willing to change their minds. And they were willing to do what was necessary, but still fighting for the truth, still fighting for the end of slavery. That's the point, is there's going to be some shift. There's going to be some turbulence. There's still going to be some fights within communities. Sure. But the point is that we stay grounded as to what we're trying to do. That's what the whole point of why I made that whole talk about self-defense, because, there's value in both, pacifism, self-defense, left brain, right brain, upper chakra, lower chakra, all that stuff, right? Meat diets and vegan diets. People will talk about this stuff all day long. The point is that you see that there's value in all of it, because there's people who heal from from all of it, depending
That's
on how
right.
they use it, and everybody's from different environments. And it's beauty to see that, and that we have guaranteed with freedom. The ability to choose, and that's beautiful. So respecting other people's choices, respecting other people's opinions, but still being honest with them. And you can be honest without being condescending. You can be honest, without being super loud. You can be honest without, making people mad and losing your job and all this stuff. Like you said,
Yeah.
talking to police. I think it's all important that people evaluate that the fact that as long as they're not lying, as long as they're not contributing to slavery, they have nothing to worry about. They're following the destiny of the world that they see, from looking at the nature of the world and nature of who we are, is inevitable. Like, we have to be free. An ant in a jar is going to try everything in its power to get out of that jar because it realizes it needs freedom. That's what happens when people lose their freedom. They realize how essential it is. A lot of people have these moments where they wake up, they see the soul, they start to feel an essence of, wow, this is why life is so important. They lose a loved one, they lose something really important. It's the lessons of loss, losing something part of our nature. So people see they're losing their families, they're losing different things. That should inspire them to want to gain it back or want to create it. And you can create it. Your mind is ultimately the creator. May you say the sub-creator, the reflection of the mind of the world, or may you say natural law or nature itself. Your mind is what's able to manifest everything into existence. So if you think something and you imagine something, you can absolutely create it. And that's just why we create so many illusions for ourselves, because human beings are powerful. If you believe in zombies and unicorns, well, you can make that a reality because you have artificial intelligence, you have the ability to make stuffed animals, and people will start believing these things are actually real. And it starts to look real because people put so much time and energy into making it look real. And so if you put all your time and energy into what is actually real, past all the veils, past all the illusions, then you will see an awakening happen where people start to look at all the veils of ignorance and lies. They see it for what it is, lies, which they would have not seen otherwise. I wouldn't have seen statism. I wouldn't have seen that I was participating in an immoral system if I didn't take a step back and ask myself questions. So moving ahead, that's what we have to do, is ask ourselves continually our own questions and asking other people questions as well. Build communities, gather the resources, all the resources, means of self-defense and pacifism and education and all forms of different food supply, and make it so that way people have choice. Like you said, we can unite around that idea and we can end slavery. That's it.
Yep. Beautiful. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for joining us. This is amazing talk. Ending Slavery Summit is live now. Check out the book as well. Cory, thanks for your time. Check out his website there. What is it? Nita.1 is your website?
Yes, that's the movement website created for everybody. My own links, just look up Cory, Nature is the Answer. The movement is there just to simply educate people, and that's pretty much it. My own content, same deal pretty much, and I encourage people, like I said, to get involved, and that's why I do it. I don't do it for my own gain. I don't do anything for any financial gain. I do it purely out of just the care for wanting to end slavery.
Yeah, beautiful, man. True visionary on the earth, Cory. Thank you so much. Check him out. He's on YouTube as well. You can donate to him, support his work. It's going to take visionaries like you, Cory, to help create the voluntary world that we're envisioning and creating and realizing. There's heavy lifting to be done, but we can do it. We can use the things that he's talking about. We can use our minds, our words, the art, the music, the technology, the architecture, the health, the empowerment, the children, all of it. We can do it all. So thank you for joining us on the Freedom Lovers Show. We are building a voluntary world, one relationship at a time, one conversation at a time, one seed, one solution at a time. And we're going to do it. And it's going to be up to you and I together. We can do it all. So thank you, Cory. Thanks, listeners. And we'll see you on the next show. Peace and love, everybody. We'll see you again.
Thank you.